We're live from Las Vegas, celebrating 10 years of reInvent. I'm Melissa Parent-Cheryl. How do you continuously scale? Corey Quinn of the Duckbill Group dives deep with Dave Brown, VP EC2 at AWS.
Welcome to Opinions My Own. I'm Chief Cloud Economist Corey Quinn of the Duckbill Group, and my guest today is Dave Brown, VP of EC2 at AWS, which presumably needs a few more acronyms to make it completely non-understandable. Dave, thank you for joining me.
Corey, it's great to be here.
It's definitely been an interesting show. I have to say, though, you are the VP of EC2. That is effectively all of EC2, not a subcomponent.
That's right, yeah.
I'm not saying that's a high-stress job, but on a balance, you are 22 years old. So it seems to age you a little bit. How do you sleep at all rather than just waiting for the next crisis of the moment to arise when you have something that vast that you're holding responsibility for?
Corey, I might be 22 in hexadecimal, but certainly not base 10. You know, EC2 is an amazing team. I've kind of grown up with EC2. I joined it 14 years ago as a developer, actually writing a lot of code on EC2. So I do have the benefit of knowing the service incredibly well. I've kind of been there as EC2's growing up. I've seen it grow up. Obviously, a big part of it is having an amazing team. So having an amazing team that's in the details. And the breadth is large, as you say, right? It's all about compute instances. As you know, we have quite a few of those, a lot of technology that underpins that. And it's all about networking services as well. So all of our VPCs and transit gateways, and that makes sort of the full area that I'm responsible for. And then more recently, we're also doing things like outposts and local zones, and bringing our compute closer to our customers, to metro areas. And so that's a large area. And so I think it's, one of our leadership principles is dive deep. And so I spend a lot of time with the team, sort of diving deep into key areas and just use those mechanisms. And then it's pushing ownership down. So really pushing the ownership of the hard problems into my team, employ a lot of incredible people, and then hopefully I do get peaceful sleep at night. Sometimes I don't. But
your problem? No, I'm going on vacation, which is a joke, but it's an important thing to be able to do. Is you can't deal with every problem yourself. Delegation's critical, or you'll effectively lose your mind.
Yeah, one of the things that AWS has definitely taught a lot of us is how to scale. And I don't actually think it's a journey we'll ever be good, or something we'll ever be good at, but it's something we'll continuously working on, is how do you continuously scale? As the business gets larger, as we get more customers, as we build more features, as we hire more people, how do you scale as a leader? And so having a great team and being able to delegate has been key to that.
It strikes me that even now, no one knows how to build a hyperscale service or hyperscale platform, because the people who have done it have all done it organically and learned the lessons of doing it for at least a decade. And as you go, and if someone's starting to do it today, their journey is going to look very different. I will say that AWS makes it easier for folks to do that because you have production-grade equipment to start with, and it's not, well, I'm going to have a bunch of Raspberry Pis, and eventually I'm going to have to get real servers, and eventually I'll need to have redundant power supplies in those servers, and so on and so forth. It's use whatever you want, and you're not going to have to backtrack and start over again in quite the same way.
Yeah, it is incredibly hard. I was just having a conversation yesterday with somebody about how hard it is to build a service. Out the gate, it's actually relatively easy. And when we built EC2, one of the funny things was when we had new hires come in or interns come in, we say, well, what do you think EC2 looks like? Just draw it on the whiteboard. And in most cases, they actually drew the EC2 architecture on the whiteboard, and it was very, very simple. But being able to build a service that survives going through the scaling curve, and the really popular AWS services go through that scaling curve, and that's where it gets really, really hard. One of the things I see is people tend to overcomplicate their services when they start out. AWS has an incredible set of tools, and in many cases, engineers will say, let me see how many of these I can actually use for my project. But obviously, just keeping it simple, and then making sure that you can support customers at scale and you test for scale is sort of the secret. And we have built an incredible suite of services. We've also learned a lot of lessons over the years. And so internally we have our metrics meeting, so we share that across the teams, and then we put it into our well-architected review for customers. So a lot of those internal lessons and lessons we get from our customers as well all go into this well-architected review that we then can give back to customers and they can use for their systems. But it's definitely hard, and that's something you've got to understand. When you see somebody else have an issue, I think there's a certain amount of understanding for, this is really hard what we're trying to do at crazy scale.
It's been fascinating watching the growth of the platform itself. When it first launched, it was, I don't want to say it was bad, because it wasn't. It was an interesting approach, but it was also very constrained and very limited in some ways. You got one instance size, which later became known as the M1.small family. Okay. You did not have ephemeral disk. You had ephemeral disk, you did not have persistent disk.
Yeah.
And I looked at it back then, and that's nonsense. Who would ever use that for anything? And it's a common problem in technology in general, and AWS in particular. You see something at launch, you think, okay, it has these limits, so it's not for me. Check back a little while later. Things don't get worse with time, they get better, way better.
Yeah.
But back then, it was sort of the Henry Ford of EC2 instances, where his famous line of, you can have it in any color you want so long as it's black.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, then auto-scaling started being a thing. And okay, well, in cloud, things are going to go down from time to time, so there are reliability concerns. And almost without noticing, I find that when I'm remoting into one of my EC2 instances that I use as a developer box, because I still write code in weird ways, and my SSH session hangs, my immediate thought is no longer, oh, the instance went down, it was my internet connection is out. When I do find that it's an EC2 instance that's gone out, it's, wow, it's been a while since this happened, why would it? Oh, right, it's a spot instance. That's the whole point, is that it will go down when there's a demand on the capacity. It feels like things like that are never, and today everything is more reliable, the end. It's rather a creeping awareness of just how vast and reliable the platform has been.
Yeah. Well, it's a journey, and you joke about saying who would ever use this back in 2006, and don't tell anyone, Corey, but I actually thought exactly the same thing back then, right? When I joined AWS in EC2, I was like, well, people would ask me what we're building. I'm like, well, Amazon's doing this thing with computers on the internet, and we'll kind of see where it goes. But
you mean the bookstore?
Yeah, the bookstore. Well, actually, in South Africa, nobody even really knew who Amazon was, because
you mean the river?
Yeah, exactly. So, and over, obviously, just the journey's been incredible. But you talk a little bit about the availability side. And that's been a very interesting journey for us, right? Because you've got to tackle it on every single angle. And so what you were talking about there was specifically, instance availability. How available is an M1 small, right? How available is a C5? How available are our GPU instances? And, for a lot of our early customers, they understood that this was the cloud. And you spoke about auto-scaling. And in auto-scaling, you don't really care about your instances. If an instance is unhealthy, well, just replace it and launch a new one. And a large number of our customers think about instances that way. That's the more cloud-native way of thinking about your machines. But we have a lot of customers today that, they love that instance. That instance runs their application, and if that instance goes away, they have to do some work to get it back. And so what's, in recent years, what's become critically important for us is being able to give customers an AFR that exceeds their expectations and what they could do on-prem.
I'm sorry, an AFR?
An annual failure rate. So
excellent.
we're thinking about hardware failure. How often does my instance fail? And we actually defined AFR, typically AFR is defined as sort of a failure. Your hard drive fails and you have to replace it. What we've done in EC2 is we said that an AFR is actually any time your instance does anything, or an AFR failure rather is any time your instance does anything that you didn't expect it to do. So for example, if it reboots, or you have a networking event, or you have a drive failure, any of those are counted as an AFR failure, whether or not we actually have to replace hardware at the end of the day. And it's been a really interesting journey, and I was very happy to hear you say that things are more reliable with time, because that's what we're seeing in the numbers. And we're actually seeing better AFRs now than we thought would be mathematically possible. So when you build an instance, you take all the AFRs that all the manufacturers give to you, and you come up with a number, and we're actually significant lower, in some cases more than half times what the mathematical AFR would actually be. And what we've come to realize is nobody actually runs their hardware at the scale of AWS. And so at incredible scale, when you are really focused on understanding every single issue and fixing every single issue, which we do, we have teams dedicated to this in my organization, you're actually able to get AFRs that are significantly lower. And then obviously we can do things in the cloud, like move your instance around if we need to prevent any sort of failure or degrade notice or retirement notice for you. And so it's been a good journey, and I'm pretty happy with the progress that we made there.
It's really interesting watching the stories that customers, and I include myself in this, by the way, as a customer, the lies that we tell ourselves, such as, oh, it's the cloud. I treat those instances like they're cattle. They're not pets where I have to curate them. I just go ahead and replace them as interchangeable, fungible things. And they're not. And you have customers that are spending ages to certify their workloads on new instance families. So I'm sure earlier this month or last month, whatever it was, that there was some customer out there somewhere who had finally said, okay, I have finally finished migrating from C4 instances to C5 instances. Now to take a big gulp of hot coffee and then check the AWS blog on the day the C6i instances came out, because the cycle begins again. And the pace of change is on some level relentless. It can be challenging.
It is. I mean, customers also want that pace of change, right? That's one of the advantages of the cloud is historically you wouldn't be able to consider changing instances to a newer processor, once a year or once every 2 years, whatever the cadence might be. And so it is incredibly important that we always have the latest hardware available for our customers. We have many customers that are continuously asking me, when am I going to get Intel Ice Lake? And that's the C6i instance, the latest processor from Intel. Or when am I going to get AMD Milan, right? The latest processor from AMD on AWS. And so we do have to make sure that we work very closely with those partners and that we bring those instances, to the cloud. The good news is, and one thing we really sort of our customer obsession, and you've actually commented about this a lot on Twitter, is our deprecation policy. And we're very careful about deprecating anything, and I think you've seen that, right?
Whenever it happens, it's almost a celebration of, yay, they turned something off that, of course, you weren't using, because if customers are using it, you're loath to turn any of them off.
That's the thing, So like, VPC or EC2 Classic, the classic network that we had before VPC was the one we recently just did a deprecation for. And that was honestly 10 years after we essentially, said, hey, there's VPCs available now. And only because the number of customers were down to a handful that we could actually move off.
I just assume there's one obstinate customer, no, and at some point it's, can we just come in and do it for you? No. And, you meet customers where they are.
Yeah, and the same's true for instances. We still have customers running the M1 Small today. And so you speak about that, hey, I've now got to go to a C6. Well, the good news is you don't actually have to go to a C6. If that C5 is working for you, and you've got a workload that runs well on that C5, or even that M1 or C1, we launched more than 12 years ago, you can keep running on that. And we work very hard to make sure that those instances are available for you as well.
The new family of instances comes out, and when people are upset because they just moved to C5, well, it's not because the C5 is going away. It's that it's almost buyer's remorse as far as, I should have just waited and migrated to this instead. But they can still use those C5 instances for basically indefinitely.
Absolutely.
There's no reason for them not to, other than improve performance and improved economics.
Yeah, and at some point they're going to have to weigh up the benefit that they get from a C6 versus a C5. And they say for their business at some point, the 15% price performance improvement you'll see there, let me move to that newer instance type. But they get to decide at what time they want to do that.
And with savings plans extending to all usage, it changes significantly.
Absolutely.
As far as, well, I just bought a bunch of instance reservations, and now there's a better one out there.
That's
what
right.
gives? Now you buy a savings plan, and I'm just going to migrate on my own timetable, not one that is dictated by finance.
That's right. And that's really fantastic for customers. And that's been the big feature on savings plan that customers, and you know this well.
Oh, yes. I was doing backflips of happiness when that launched.
Yeah, because it takes out this unnatural thing of having to wait 3 years before you can move on to the next instance. You can really do it at a time frame that works for you. So customers have been really happy about that.
So a question I don't know that you folks have ever addressed, but I can make my own assumptions on this one. That when they launch something else that is a different service entirely, like Lambda, for example, I have to assume that despite them calling it serverless, there are in fact servers somewhere that are underlying this. Are those the same sort of EC2 instances that customers are using, or is there an entirely separate sidecar thing that's for internal use to run services?
Yeah, well, Corey, firstly, I just thank you for calling that out, because, I remember sitting in the NDJC keynote when he announced serverless, and I just wanted to scream,
I
let everybody know
that was a personal attack.
Like behind the scenes, there's an EC2 instance. This isn't really serverless.
I imagine he was disappointed in your performance that year, and it was one of those, all right, it's time, Dave, it's time. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So we actually, everything, all of these higher level services in AWS run on EC2. I actually ran one of the largest services that runs on EC2 back in the day, and that's Elastic Load Balancing, still in my organization. And Lambda absolutely, runs on EC2, and they present a serverless interface to their customers. But behind the scenes, Lambda is one of my customers, and I have to treat them like a customer. And Lambda's a great team. They're doing incredible things. They can be demanding at times, coming to us and asking for features and things they need. And we just love working with them. And so, working out how do you deal with some of the paradigms that serverless and even containers to some extent is bringing around, right? So we've seen the world change from, I'm happy to wait for 3 minutes to get my M1 Small small to boot, to, hey, I really want this to happen in less than a second or a few milliseconds. And so, how do I do everything that I used to have minutes to do? How do I do all of that in a few milliseconds now, including attached network interfaces and everything that they need to do? And so it's really good to have those teams driving us on the EC2 side internally as their customers continue to drive them. It's fun to support those different models.
Last year at reInvent, virtual reInvent, you had a video of you backing a truck up to deliver all of the Mac Minis for your M1. Was it Mac 1, M1? What was the actual name of the instance type?
It's the Mac 1 instance.
The Mac 1 instance.
Yeah.
Mac 1.metal.
Mac 1.metal is the name, yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
And unfortunately, they didn't seem to get what I have to assume happened before this, of you just dressed about like this, wandering into some random retail Apple store, and someone comes over and says, hey, can I help you? And the answer would be, yeah, I would like to buy some Mac Minis. And I have to imagine that that is roughly what it looked like at that point. But that was one of the neatest releases I can remember coming out of EC2, just because of what a turning point it was. Now, these are not designed to be Amazon workspaces running Mac OS. They are designed to be the CI/CD type of build nodes that, until these came out, everyone sort of had wedged under a table somewhere in their office, and they hid them whenever the auditor came by. Suddenly, you don't have to do that anymore. You can apply the rest of AWS to a Mac environment. And by the rest of AWS, I mean IAM. I mean attaching EBS volumes. I mean not having to worry about AppleCare expiring on the thing that's building things. And you had videos talking about how you built these custom chassis and how they had a Nitro external sidecar via Thunderbolt, I believe, if memory serves correctly. And it was just a really intricate and neat approach to seeing how all of that got built. It's been a year. How have you found the reception for those instances to be?
It's been great. It's been really, really good. And it is exactly the use case you call out. We've had a number of customers that have migrated from their data center and moved everything to AWS. And all they had were a few Mac Minis, either in the data center or under their desk, as you call out. And so we were getting a lot of customers saying, well, what do you do about our Mac workloads? How do we build for the Apple devices? And so it was important that we brought that to the cloud. The thing with working with Apple, and I've been a long time Apple user now myself, and if you've used that, it's all about the experience, right? And everything's built into that, and a Mac has to perform in a certain way. So we knew when we did it, we had to bring the Apple hardware. There was no way we could get the full Apple experience outside of that, right? And also we had to do it in a way that we bring the best of Apple, exactly what you would expect, and then the best of AWS, and bring all of that together.
Now, let's be very clear here. This is not the first time you've done this with Apple products. People love to think I'm having fun at their expense when I talk about this, but I'm not. Device Farm is a spectacular example of this, where you have literal Android and iOS devices plugged in that customers can remote into and use for large-scale or small-scale testing of mobile apps. It's one of those, so there's a whole bunch of mobile devices stuffed in a data center. And AWS sells this as a service. Is it real, or am I messing with you? And most people get it wrong, but it very much exists.
It absolutely exists. We have drawers of Apple devices that are all plugged in, and you can do remote testing on them. On the Mac Mini side, it was super interesting because a Mac Mini just happens to be almost exactly a little bit smaller than one U. And also 2 Mac Minis actually fit perfectly into a server chassis that we use. And so what we did is we actually put two Mac Minis into a EC2 server chassis, and we wrapped them with Nitro cards. And we used almost every single port. I think we did use all the ports on the back of the Mac Mini. And with that, we were actually able to remotely control the Mac Mini. The one thing we couldn't do programmatically was actually push the power button. There's no interface on the Mac Mini that actually lets you remotely power cycle it, and so we built.
So is that the worst internship in the world, or did you find a way around it?
We found a way around it. Yeah, exactly. So we actually have a little solenoid that you send a command to, and it actually sends out a little arm that actually pushes the power button as if you were using your finger. So we actually have that inside our server. So it was a lot of fun to go and build, and it's given customers that perfect experience of they get a Mac that behaves exactly as they want, but as you say, they can use the rest of EC2.
I have to ask, because there is no way for me to find out, because you do not give data center tours. But when that solenoid activates, can you hear it from in front of the rack?
I'm not sure you can actually hear it. I've seen it work with the server open, but I don't think you probably can't hear a whole lot in our data centers. Have you stood next to an outpost?
Not yet. It turns out that you are remarkably unwilling to send one to me unless I first sign up for enterprise support, which is a little challenging given my scale. And secondly, unless I lie to you
Okay.
and tell you I do
Well,
in fact have a loading dock.
I will have to get you into the lab sometime so you can come and just how little you'd be able to hear in a data center.
This is called don't offer if you're not serious. I've started my career working in data centers, which I have to imagine is probably a little bit different than the inside of an AWS data center.
Yeah.
In my case,
Most
it was,
likely.
ooh, this is a big one. We're going to have 6 full racks in this location. Yet, turns out that people's idea of what big looks like varies depending upon where they've worked.
Yeah, exactly.
So lately you announced a EC2 instance type that I find relatively silly only because it's not a use case that I have, and I believe it's the VT1.
Oh, yeah.
It does video transcoding. It is a specific instance type optimized for that workload.
Yeah.
And it starts to look a little bit like every workload out there, like, ooh, this one's for doing obnoxious tweets on Twitter. This one's for doing sincere tweets on Twitter. And they're all named as if you finally snapped and threw your wireless keyboard down the stairs. But at what point are you going to stop differentiating to a point where there are thousands of instance types that I can choose from? So obviously, whichever one I pick is going to be wrong. How do you balance the making it understandable versus making it fit for various customer uses?
Yeah, it is challenging. I mean, that's the downside of just the diversity that we have in instances. And they really are all tailored to specific workloads. And when you get into the details and you start talking to customers, they have their instance that they really like and works perfectly for them. And the funny thing actually is, I speak to a lot of customers who say, you know what, like there needs to be something between that M5 and that R5. I need 1 to 6 memory ratio is kind of the sweet spot for me. So many customers are actually asking us for more instance types. We're looking to how do we bring new instance types to win workloads for customers? What are the workloads that they want to bring to AWS, and how do we find the right instance for that? It does mean that we end up with really strange naming. I think I heard you talk about Dave Brown and Matt Garman having a game of battleships at some point. I'm getting to the point where it's starting to look like a UUID, right? Let's just pick a 128-bit random number and be done with it, right? And
I think that's what they're doing for service names in the next iteration.
Maybe. I don't know how much it really matters anymore to customers. We do have services that help customers select, like Compute Optimizer can help you better right-size your instance, and we've built a couple of other things in that space. The VT1 instance was really interesting. We actually worked with Twitch, as you know, as one of our internal teams. We ended up acquiring Twitch some years ago. And with how the world has changed in the last 2 years and just how much has gone online, there's a growing need to be able to stream with very, very low latency.
Yeah, and Elastic Transcoder and Elemental as well.
Absolutely.
They're two options that are varying degrees of manage.
Yeah.
This is a way, I presume, of letting customers do it where they really need to tweak the knobs and dials.
Exactly. And so in the case of Twitch, that they want to be able to do a live stream and have less than a second of latency from it actually happening to when you see it on your screen. And it's just incredibly difficult to do without an accelerator card. And so those cards have a special accelerator that actually only adds 10 milliseconds of latency for a 4K stream. And you can do multiple 4K streams on a single card.
And if there's one thing I understand about customers and the Amazonian philosophy, someone somewhere is annoyed at that 10 millisecond latency and is trying to find a way to optimize it.
That's absolutely right. That's not going to be fast enough in a few years' time. I'm almost certain of that.
No. I understand that there's only a 10 millisecond delay, but I want to watch it now.
That's right.
Sounds like my level of pedantry. I'd go down that path.
Absolutely right.
Dave, I want to thank you for suffering my slings and arrows in person rather than generally on the internet the way that you normally do. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
It's been great. Thanks, Corey.
I'm Chief Cloud Economist Corey Quinn of the Duckbill Group. Dave Brown, VP of EC2 at AWS, has been my guest, and this is Opinions My Own.
Thanks to Corey for taking us through that journey. I'm Melissa Paranchero, and you're watching Live from reInvent.